Hey, welcome back to the trail, friends. Right now we are lacing up and heading into the woods just south of the Minnesota River, about 20 miles from downtown Minneapolis, where two shining lakes sit stitched together like a figure eight. This is Pryor Lake, Minnesota. It looks like a modern lake town, and it is, but the story under our boots runs deep. It starts with a railroad man, runs through a golden age of summer resorts, and lands in the quiet hardwood forest we are walking through today. So breathe in that pine air, and let me tell you how this place got its name. Let me set the scene on the map. We are in Scott County, in the southwest corner of the Twin Cities metro. To the north runs the Minnesota River. Below it spreads a green shelf of rolling farmland and glacier-carved water that folks around here call River South. Two lakes anchor the town. Upper Pryor Lake covers about 350 acres, and Lower Pryor Lake spreads across roughly 810 acres, and a narrow channel ties them together. Off to the southeast sits Cleary Lake, and a little to the west lies Spring Lake. Keep that shape in your mind, because every chapter of this story wraps around that water. Long before any of these names on the map, the Dakota people knew this water well. They called the lake Bde Maya though, which carries the meaning Lake of the Blue Banks. Picture it. Steep shorelines, blue clay banks catching the morning light, fish thick in the shallows, wild rice and game all around. This was homeland, a place of living and gathering, and it had been for generations. We will pick that thread back up later in the walk, because the descendants of these first peoples are very much part of Pryor Lake today. For now, just know the water had a name and a story long before the trains ever came. In the 1850s, the first European settlers began rolling into this corner of Minnesota, and what pulled them here was the dirt. Rich, dark, glacier-fed farmland, the kind that makes a homesteader's heart skip. They cleared trees, broke sod, and planted wheat and corn on ground that had never seen a plow. For its first couple of decades, this was a farming community through and through, a scatter of homesteads and fields with no town to really speak of. But something was coming across the prairie that would change all of that in a single season. Iron rails. In 1871, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, a line most folks just called the Milwaukee Road, pushed its tracks straight through this country. The Hastings and Dakota Division came grading and spiking its way across the fields, and by 1872 the line was complete. Now, a railroad in the 1870s was not just transportation, it was destiny. A town could live or die by whether the tracks ran through it, and this quiet lake suddenly found itself sitting right beside the main line. The whistle changed everything. And the man who decided where that whistle would blow is the man this town is named for. His name was Charles H. Pryor, and he was a superintendent with the Milwaukee Road. Now here is a job title worth pausing on. Part of what Pryor did was decide where the new tracks would go and where new towns would be born along them. He was, in a very real sense, a maker of towns. When the line reached this beautiful stretch of water, the lake beside the tracks simply picked up his name, Pryor. Not because he settled here or farmed here, but because he was the railroad man whose maps put this place on the timetable. and Charles Pryor was just getting warmed up. The name became official fast. In 1872, just as the rail line was finishing up, a post office opened here under the name Pryor Lake. And in a frontier community, a post office was a big deal. It meant you existed on paper. It meant letters, newspapers, catalog orders, and connection to the wider world all had a place to land. The little settlement by the water now had a name that would stick, stamped onto every envelope coming and going. What had been simply the Lake of the Blue Banks was, on the official record at least, becoming Pryor Lake. Here is a fun fact about Charles Pryor that most people walking these trails have no idea about. Our lake was not his only namesake, not by a long shot. Working out of Minneapolis for the Milwaukee Road, Pryor's whole job was laying out new towns along the expanding rails. Between 1880 and 1884, at least 23 towns in what would become South Dakota were platted on land tied to Charles Pryor. 23 towns. So the fellow whose name is on this Minnesota lake was, in the truest sense, a professional builder of communities across the whole northern plains. Our lake just happens to be the one that kept his name closest to home. With a railroad, a station, and a post office, the settlement was ready to become a real town on paper. In 1875, the village was platted, meaning surveyors drew up the streets, the blocks, and the lots in a neat grid, ready for homes and shops and dreams. A platted village is a town declaring its intentions. It says, "We are not just passing through, we are staying, build here." Storefronts went up near the depot, farmers came to town to ship grain and buy supplies, and the little community by the water began to find its rhythm. But its most glamorous chapter was still ahead. Let me tell you about the water itself, because it is genuinely special. Pryor Lake is really two lakes in a trench coat. Upper Pryor and Lower Pryor joined by a channel together holding around 1,340 acres of water wrapped in some 21 miles of shoreline. That is a lot of edge, a lot of coves, a lot of quiet bays. And it is deep too, ranking among the deepest lakes in all of Scott County. For a young town, all that shoreline was not just pretty. It was about to become the whole economy. Because in the 1870s, city folks were falling in love with the idea of the lake. Let's just stop here a second and look out over the water. Imagine it is 1879. No houses ringing the shore, no docks, just this shining lake and a brand new railroad running right up to its edge. Now imagine you are a tired city family in Minneapolis, sweltering through a hot summer, and someone hands you a train ticket to a cool blue paradise. That, my friends, is the beginning of the Golden Age. In 1879, the resort era opened with a grand flourish, the Grainwood House. Picture a sprawling Victorian hotel rising on a point of land just north of the channel between the two lakes. This was no modest boarding house. The Grainwood boasted around 150 rooms and cottages, tennis courts, sailboats, catamarans gliding across the bay, and its very own railroad station right on the Hastings and Dakota line. You could board a train in the city and step off practically at the hotel's front porch. For a certain slice of Gilded Age Minnesota, this was the place to summer. And oh, how they came. This was the era of the excursion train, when railroads ran special weekend cars packed with day trippers and vacationers fleeing the summer heat of the city. On a warm Saturday, the platform at Prior Lake would fill with families in their Sunday best, parasols and picnic baskets and straw hats, all pouring off the cars and heading for the water. The train did not just deliver mail and grain anymore. It delivered fun. Prior Lake had become a destination, a whole town whose summer heartbeat was set by the arrival and departure of the excursion cars. So what did you actually do at a lake resort in those days? Well, you slowed down, which was the entire point. You rented a rowboat or took a turn in a sailboat across the bay. You played lawn tennis, strolled the grounds, and danced in the evenings. You fished off the dock and swam in that cool blue water. You sat on a wide porch, sipped lemonade, and watched the sun slide down over the lake while the day's worries stayed behind in the smoky city. It was leisure, sold by the week, and Prior Lake sold it beautifully for decades. By the Roaring '20s, this little lake town had a reputation to match its ambitions. In 1927, a newspaper called Prior Lake Minnesota's second Minnetonka. Now if you know your Minnesota lakes, you know that is high praise. Lake Minnetonka was the crown jewel of Twin Cities lake resorts, the grandest of them all. To be called the second Minnetonka meant Prior Lake had truly arrived as a premier summer playground. The hotels, the boats, the bands, the crowds, all of it earned this modest lake a place among the great resort destinations of the region. But grand wooden hotels lit by lamplight lived dangerous lives, and the Grainwood learned that the hard way. Twice. In 1894, the original Grainwood House burned to the ground. And here is the thing that tells you how strong the resort business was. They immediately rebuilt it, bigger and grander, as the Grainwood Hotel. It ran for another 3.5 decades until 1930, when a second fire finished it for good. This time it was not rebuilt. One of the great landmark hotels of Prior Lake passed into memory, but the resort town rolled on without it. Because by then, Prior Lake was not a one-hotel town anymore, not even close. By the 1950s, at the height of it all, 19 different resorts operated on Prior and Spring Lakes. 19. Places with cheerful names like Green Heights Resort and Watzel's Resort dotted the shorelines, each with its own beach, its own boats, its own regulars who came back summer after summer. Whole families measured their years by which cabin they rented and which lake they swam in. The shoreline hummed all season long with the sound of screen doors, outboard motors, and kids cannonballing off the docks. Let me point you a little to the west, towards Spring Lake, because it is part of this same story and part of the parkland we can roam today. Spring Lake shared in the resort boom. its shores lined with the same cabins and swimming beaches that made this whole area a summer magnet. Today, a big chunk of it is protected as Spring Lake Regional Park, a rolling landscape of prairie, woods, and water where you can hike and paddle and just be in the quiet. The resorts have faded, but the reason people fell for this land, the water and the woods, is still right here to enjoy. Feel how the trail rolls here, up and over these gentle hardwood hills. This is glacier country, and every rise and hollow was shaped by ice 10,000 years ago. It is easy out here to forget the calendar entirely. But all of this beautiful protected land we are walking, it did not just happen. It came from farms, from families, and from a big idea about keeping green space green. Let me tell you how the fields became a park. Underneath the whole glamorous resort story, remember, this was always farm country. While the summer crowds splashed in the lake, families all around were working the land year-round, raising crops and livestock on that rich glacial soil that drew the very first settlers back in the 1850s. Farming was the steady heartbeat between the summer seasons, the everyday work that held the community together long after the last excursion train pulled out each autumn. And one of those farm families would end up giving this region one of its greatest gifts, though they may never have imagined it. Just southeast of town sat the Cleary family farm, wrapped around a pretty little lake that took the family's name. For generations, the Clearys worked this ground, the same as their neighbors, growing crops on land they knew field by field and fence by fence. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, everything around them started to change. The Twin Cities were sprawling outward, subdivisions were creeping south, and open land like this was suddenly precious in a brand new way. What happened next turned a private family farm into a place that belongs to everyone. In the early 1970s, the great-great-grandchildren of the Cleary family sold the farm, not to a developer carving up lots, but to the public, to be preserved as parkland. Scott County adopted a first master plan for it in 1972, and Cleary Lake Regional Park was born. Today it is run through a joint agreement between Scott County and the Three Rivers Park District. It stretches across roughly 1,186 acres of rolling woods, restored prairie, and that quiet central lake. A working farm became a forever park, right at the moment the suburbs came knocking. And what a park it turned into. This is very likely the ground under our boots right now, so look around. Cleary Lake Regional Park offers close to 6 miles of hiking trails, plus paths for biking, and in winter those same rolling hills become groomed cross-country ski trails through the hardwoods. There is a swimming beach on the lake, a campground, picnic areas, and even a 9-hole golf course with a driving range. From a single family's cornfields to a place where thousands come to hike, ski, paddle, and breathe. That is a pretty wonderful second act for an old farm. So what happened to all those summer resorts, the 19 of them? The world changed, that is what. Through the 1960s, lakeshore property grew far too valuable to rent out by the week, and the realignment of Highway 13 made Prior Lake an easy daily drive from the city. And that was the quiet turning point. Prior Lake stopped being a place you visited for a weekend and started being a place you lived in year-round. The cabins gave way to homes, the resorts closed their doors, and a summer playground began transforming into a suburb. And then the growth truly exploded. Stop here at the top of this rise and look out. Peaceful, right? Woods, water, sky. Now I want you to hold that peaceful picture in your head, because I am about to hit you with some numbers that show just how fast this sleepy resort town woke up and became one of the fastest growing suburbs in the whole state of Minnesota. Here we go. In 1900, Prior Lake was home to just 148 people. By 1940, still only 349. By 1950, 536. Small, sleepy, seasonal. Then the dam broke. By 1980, the population had rocketed to 7,284, a jump of more than 500% in a single decade. By 2010, nearly 23,000. And by the 2020 census, 27,617 people called Prior Lake home, with projections climbing toward 37,500 by 2040. From a village of a few hundred to a small city in living memory. The paperwork tells the same story of a place growing up. Prior Lake had first incorporated as a village back on February 11th, 1891, and here is a charming detail. To even meet the population requirement, the young village had to annex 3 surrounding farms just to have enough people to count. Then, on June 1st, 1921, Prior Lake officially became a city. From a handful of homes by a depot, to a chartered village leaning on its neighbors' farmhouses, to a full-fledged Minnesota city. Every step marked by that same steady pull of the water and the rails. And through all that growth, the lakes never stopped being the main attraction. On any warm weekend today, Upper and Lower Prior Lake fill up with pontoons, fishing boats, water skiers, and paddlers making the most of all 21 miles of that winding shoreline. In winter, the same water goes still and hard, and out come the ice houses, the snowmobiles, and the anglers drilling holes over the deepest water in the county. The excursion trains are long gone, but the reason they ran is still exactly the same. People just love being on this lake. And it is not only people out here enjoying the water. These lakes and the protected woods around them are alive with wildlife. Deer slip through the hardwoods at dawn, herons stalk the shallows on stilt legs, turtles sun themselves on half-sunk logs, and in autumn the skies fill with geese working their way south. All that shoreline and marsh and restored prairie makes wonderful habitat, a green refuge tucked right up against a growing metro. So when you are out here, keep your eyes soft and your voice low, and this landscape will show you who else calls the Lake of the Blue Banks home. Now let's return to a thread we opened way back at the start of the walk. The Dakota people who named this water Bde Maya, though, never left this land. Their descendants are the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, whose lands lie partly within Prior Lake's boundaries, annexed into the city in 1972. The community received federal recognition on November 28, 1969, with Norman M. Crooks elected as its first chairman. It is a sovereign nation and a good neighbor, deeply woven into the life, the economy, and the story of this whole area for generations past and generations to come. One of the most well-known places in all of Scott County belongs to that community, Mystic Lake. What began with a bingo hall in 1982 grew, on May 12, 1992, into Mystic Lake Casino, which became the largest casino in Minnesota and one of the largest employers in the entire county. Today, the Mystic Lake Casino Hotel draws visitors from across the region with its hotel, dining, and the Mystic Showroom, where big-name performers take the stage. From a lake of blue banks to a landmark that lights up the night, it is one more remarkable chapter in this land's long story. So how does a modern lake town celebrate all of this? By the water, of course, and with music. Prior Lake's community gathers each summer for its lakefront celebration, a weekend of live music, local food, vendors, and that small-town spirit that the growth never washed away. And since 2010, the Prior Lake Rotary Club has thrown the Lakefront Music Fest, which began as a jazz and blues festival and grew into one of the biggest outdoor music events in the whole Twin Cities metro, with its proceeds flowing right back into the community. The excursion crowds have simply become the festival crowds. The heart of all that celebrating is Lakefront Park, right on the water in the middle of town. Big improvements back in the mid-1990s turned it into a true community gathering place, a stage set right against the lake, and it has been the beating heart of Prior Lake's summers ever since. Think about the beautiful symmetry of it. A town that was born because a railroad brought people to a lake to play still, all these years later, brings its people down to that very same water to sing and dance and celebrate together. Some things about a place just never change. So there it is, friends, Prior Lake, Minnesota. A lake the Dakota called the Blue Banks, given a railroad man's name, turned into a Golden Age resort so grand they called it the Second Minnetonka, faded into farm country, reborn as parkland when a family gave their fields to the future, and grown into a thriving little city that still lives and breathes by its water. Not bad for a stop on the timetable. If you enjoyed wandering through this history with me, do give this a like and subscribe and keep exploring right here with Fru World Explorer. Until the next trail, take care of each other and go find your own Blue Bank Lake. See you out there.